coming into this earnings, I knew it was a big moment for what used to be this super popular stock like a year and a half ago. Nectar is getting wiped out today. Start from the top. What happened?
Yeah, so it's always good to be with you and talk biotech.
Thank you.
Yesterday was wild, and Nectar was definitely at the top of the list. So, we've been talking about this stock for a couple of years now, and one thing that you and your viewers, I think, will remember is that the problem with this company lately is that their data has not been living up to what we saw very early on, and we've all been scratching our heads and wondering why. And the company announced last night that they discovered something that's incredible and very sad, to be honest. They learned that some of the initial batches that the patients received in their trials were suboptimal. And they think that impacted the responses that the patients that received the suboptimal drugs had in the trials, which is the saddest thing that could happen in a trial like this. When a cancer patient signs up for a clinical trial, they deserve the best. They deserve every I to be dotted and every T to be crossed. And it doesn't look like that's what happened in this case. So Nectar is going to be in the penalty box for a while.
So, Brad, to be specific here, this is a really important point, which is, does this mean that it questions the efficacy of the treatment? Does it call into question the sort of leadership or oversight and the ability of the team to conduct these trials? What's the most sort of damning takeaway from it? Or is it just that we don't know how the drugs work because they weren't administered properly?
Without a doubt, the latter, the leadership and the oversight. I mean, they would actually argue to you that this is scientifically and medically a positive thing because they feel like they found a problem and they've resolved it going forward, and they think that the responses in their future trials will be better because of it. But
Sure.
This is a huge black eye, and it really questions what's going on there and their ability to conduct trials. And that was actually only one piece of bad news they had last night. Another thing is, appears that the enthusiasm of their partner Bristol for this drug has lessened. So they originally had plans to do something like 18 pivotal trials together, combining this drug, Bempeg, and Bristol's big immunotherapy drug, Opdivo. And another thing they said last night is that Bristol is really only along for the ride on 5 or 6 pivotal trials. And so that's another thing people are wondering if the enthusiasm is lowered for this. Now, on a positive sign, the FDA gave their combination in melanoma something called breakthrough therapy designation last week. So that's a small positive, and suggests that this really could be an important combination if it bears out to succeed in later trials. But the bottom line is this is just a mess, and they're going to be in the penalty box for a while. And one catalyst that investors were looking forward to this fall that might have provided a reason for a rebound was new data we were looking forward to seeing in lung cancer. Lung cancer, sadly, is one of the biggest indications. And in this case, they had another piece of bad news last night. They announced that we won't see that lung cancer data. The enrollment from that trial is going slower than they expected. So all around, they just had a ton of, you've heard of kitchen sink. Well, this was like the entire kitchen of bad news that they disclosed last night. So it's going to take them a while to get over this.
Now, let's talk a few other ones here, Brad, which is the volatility in Sarepta, I think, caught investors' eyes this week as well. We had a little bit of a sell-off there from $150 down to $130. Again, when we talk about these companies, mid to smaller cap companies working on rare disease treatments, right? For Sarepta, we're talking about muscular dystrophy, whereas for Nectar, primarily on the oncology front. What happened here with Sarepta? Because they were saying that, there was a mistake in a report that went to the FDA or something like that?
That's right. This isn't a good lesson about biotech investing. Sarepta was halted yesterday for hours. And what happened was there was a patient in one of their muscular dystrophy trials that was reported to a government database to have had a troubling side effect and was hospitalized overnight earlier this year. And it turned out when we learned more details about this, fortunately, the patient was fine. And actually, the company is arguing that it should have never been reported to this particular database to begin with. But the important lesson about investing in biotech is what Sarepta is doing is called gene therapy. And they've created billions of dollars in value based off of just a couple dozen patients worth of data. And it's really important to appreciate and to know the risks of these companies. You could have one adverse event in one patient change these things overnight. And so it's really important if you're getting into a stock like this to really understand and appreciate that risk. Any biotech company at any given moment can put out a press release that changes their fortunes 180 degrees. And fortunately, this one resolved and it looked like everything is okay. But, you know, there were 3 or 4 other companies yesterday that had terrible news that went the other direction. And so the key factor is appreciate the risk. Biology is difficult. Medicine is very difficult, and bad things happen all the time. So you've got to be careful about getting too overexposed to any one company, no matter how promising they might be.
Brad, with the focus though on these rare disease treatments, or again for very big diseases related to cancer in the case of Nectar, is there a possibility that as these pipeline type companies, early stage companies get a lot cheaper in price, that someone might be interested in the technology or the ideas that they're pioneering and tack them onto their own sort of pipeline? I'm talking acquisition possibility, because we've seen so many big pharma companies try to pick up promising drugs. Is the point that, look, these companies are less promising now, or is there actually a price that at which the risk reward to a larger pharma company that needs to build out their pipeline, it becomes compelling?
Yeah. Every company has its own story. Without a doubt, Sarepta is always at the top of everyone's short list to be bought out, because they're the leaders in this gene therapy, which is really a new era of medicine. You know, this technology is such a game changer and looks so promising that it may cure some of these terrible diseases. I mean, in this case, we're talking about muscular dystrophy. You probably remember the Jerry Lewis telethons for decades, and there's true promise to make a big dent in that disease right now. And big pharmaceutical companies are eventually going to need that, because that's where medicine is going forward. Nectar is a little bit of a different story, because they already have this big tie-up with Bristol. The one fortunate thing in their case is they have $1.8 billion in cash. Bristol paid them $1.85 billion earlier last year. And so they'll be able to run these trials and prove, whether this drug works or not on their own. So I think given the Bristol tie-up there, that one's less of an acquisition possibility. People have actually speculated that Bristol would buy them, and that's why Bristol kind of scaling things back last night is, such a big blow, because it would suggest if they're not interested in running as many trials as you thought, then certainly they're probably not going to buy the company outright. So. Yeah. Every company has a story. I would focus on the ones that have these important new technologies, like the Sareptas of the world that are working on gene therapy and gene editing and things like that.